This is AV SuperFriends Off the Rails, an almost regularly scheduled open discussion on audio and video in higher education. We'll sound off about our most brilliant ideas, our dumbest mistakes, and everything in between. And because this conversation will almost certainly go off the rails at some point, we'll end up covering just about everything else. And now, the AV SuperFriends. For February 19th, 2021, it's the AV SuperFriends Off the Rails. Well, welcome back, everybody. Time for another podcast adventure with the AV SuperFriends. My name is Chris Decter. I'm joined by Justin, Jamie, Larry, and Mark today. And today's topic is going to be one of the return of proprietary, yet open, yet proprietary, yet not open, yet sort of AV systems, and what that might mean for all of us, as these are becoming far more popular than they really should. But before that, we were having a bit of a pre-show discussion about the higher ed AV market and how that relates to commercial AV and pro AV. And Larry, you had some good points. I'm going to turn it over to Larry, and we'll go from there.
Sure. So this is our first Off the Rails since the HIPMA conference, and it was a great conference. Really enjoyed it. However, I noticed there was a general vibe of higher ed versus integrators and consultants. And there was the whole buying direct conversation. There was the whole value of integrators as partners and the consultant panel. And all these bled on for Twitter for like days after the event. Now, personal experience, I've had good and poor experiences with integrators and consultants in the past. So I can't really make a blanket statement about good or bad for either group. I also spent 13 years working for an integrator, and that was how I got my first job in higher ed because they were my client at the time. And in that time, I can say that, in my opinion, the skill level of the higher ed in-house group has increased dramatically. In a lot of places, it's not an exaggeration to say that the staff that we have on higher ed is better than the staff that's available through the commercial groups in that area. However, I'm not sure that really means that we should push ourselves to be at that level or to get the same advantages that your commercial integrators or consultants do. And just to like narrow it down, there was a discussion of buying direct. And I have a hard time seeing what value we would get buying direct that we don't already have. I
think it's a perceived value.
Probably good. Yeah, that's probably what it is. Because I work for a smaller and like mid-sized school. I can still call up manufacturers and get support pretty easily. And I don't think that the perceived cost savings is going to be there. I know, Justin, you've got more experience working on the commercial side than probably even I do. So what's your thoughts on that?
Maybe not. I started my business from scratch. I'll just talk from an integrator side. I understand where higher ed folks are coming from because before I started my integration business, I thought the same way. The perceived value of an integrator as a higher tech is knowledge. I can call on them. They can help me fix a problem, right? Well, like Larry, like you said, that knowledge is now at a lot of higher ed institutions. Well, we don't need those integrators. Okay, well, keep costs low. So now AV people are now economy experts, right? You have purchasing scale. So let's just look at something. Put yourself in the shoes of Biamp. Put yourself in the shoes of a manufacturer. Now I've got 10,000 more customers to deal with because it doesn't make sense. So what happens there is they're going to have to bump their resources up to handle all the purchasing stuff, and then the costs are going to go up anyway. So I just don't see the long-term value there.
Yeah, that's kind of where I will too. And like, another thing is like, if we sign direct, we're only going to sign direct for the for the products we currently use. So what happens if a new company comes out that we want to get access to? Do we have to form direct relationships with them? Because we've already put the commercial integrators out of business. So they're not going to be willing to work with us.
Here's the problem that you're looking at is, oh, well, we buy Dell direct. Okay, great. But we also are not buying IBM. We are not buying Sony laptops. We are not buying whatever other laptop out there. We're only buying Dell. So Dell's like, hell yeah, we'll sign WKU up direct. We'll give them some steep discounts because they're going to keep buying Dell at mass scale. With AV systems and the complexity of what we deal with, we all know this. You can't have a Dell AV system or an Apple AV system or a Crestron AV system. Not one manufacturer makes everything under the sun. Some try to, but they don't. And we probably don't want to be stuck in a corner where you're buying audio stuff from a control company, perhaps. So it just doesn't make sense for our industry, I don't think.
With the idea of kind of comparing that to PCs and computer deployment, and a lot of times
just think about why that happens.
On everyone's campus. Well, but my point being, I think on probably everybody's campus, the whatever department, the IT department that's doing the PC support and all that, they will get their staff trained as functionally like 99% official Dell or Apple technicians, which is a manufacturer requirement to be able to support them. But that means they can do repairs on site and that sort of thing. But they're only focusing on that one aspect of it. So I would wonder from a large sense, like, would some of these companies, Panasonic or Crestron or Biamp, would they allow you to become like fully geared up and trained, repair technicians? Would that open some of these doors? But then that means, to your point, you're kind of committing to, we're only going with this company for 5 or 6 years for anything related to displays or whatever. It's going to be this company only. Which then, as you said, in AV, we'll jump all over the place. For projectors, I like this one. For LCDs, I like that one. For LEDs, I like this one. And it changes every 6 months to a year. But I just don't know how well that same model would carry over. But it's an interesting idea.
And especially when you look at the Dell PC model, every 3 or 4 years, that goes out to bid at a lot of universities, to where the next year they're going to go with a Sony or and so we're not willing to switch our entire.
Yeah, but I think
think about that point real quick. Let's put out a bid to Panasonic and Crestron and Biamp to supply classroom each. How would that work out?
Yeah.
And that's kind of our point. They can't do that with, Apple's. It's just not going to work.
Yeah, I think, a couple of things is I used to, when, 12 to 15 years ago, when I really first started this, I was one of those folks that you guys are talking about. I was really kind of irritated that we can't buy direct, and why can't we get wholesale prices? And by God, we're the University of Missouri system, and then over the years and talking with the different manufacturers and then integrating things, I realized that, no, let the integrators have their little bit of a markup on it. And it gives us that flexibility. And I think our model, like you guys had said, is completely different than from the computer side because of the scale, right? When Dell signs this contract, like at UMKC, every year they buy 10 to 12,000 units of something. In AV at UMKC, if I sign a non-compete, I'm going to wholesale contract with Biamp, I'll buy 40. Just the economy of scale just doesn't make sense. And then on top of that, how long does your Biamp last? How long does your display last? So you're not buying a new computer every year. If that display is not lasting more than a year, you probably shouldn't have signed that contract. But
Dell knows how many computers they're going to sell WKU every 3 years.
Yeah.
It's forecasting models. It's what makes sense financially, because when we, why this is not in place right now is because of money. That's what it all comes down to.
And I, for a long time, I even thought that it was wise to have like the higher ed AV purchasing group, right, where they would be their own wholesalers. Except
that would make sense.
But does it?
Maybe.
What do you have to do that? Well, you have to have the management. You have to have the PO orders. You have to have the capital.
It's just another integrator.
Basically, you've created the higher AV purchase group integration firm. So you're just buying from an integrator again, and you still can't get what you want because they don't carry everything. And
so why check off the local ones?
Diversified should join up with AVISPL to make one company called Higher Ed AV Group Purchasing People. And then everybody in higher ed would be like, "Oh, perfect! This is great. We're buying direct now."
Yeah, we're there. So I've just resolved myself to the fact that as long as you have, if you're fortunate enough that your university has or your state or wherever, it depends on what you are, has contracts with the local integrators that says you will not provide us any more than 5% over education price. And you hold them to it, and you're allowed to be held them to it. Then they get their skin, right? Because every now and then you need their help with something, and vice versa. Every now and then they need you, and so just give them their 5%. Get your brown box in the mail, put it in the classroom, and let's move on. There's bigger fights to fight than whether or not I can purchase from Sony direct, because they're hard enough to deal with anyway, let alone want to buy from them.
You want to make your purchasing department really mad? Make that university buy everything direct. Yeah, exactly.
Right. So it's like are we just trying to save time? I mean, as long as I don't have to issue multiple purchase orders and I can go to one system, one terminal, one piece of glass, I'm fine. But there are other vendors that can get things faster than other vendors, right? And it's probably in their efficiency. And we all have projects, and we know who to call when I need something tomorrow versus when I'm willing to wait, 2 weeks or whatever it is. And so there's benefits of being able to go right to the manufacturer, but there's also kind of some extra hurdles involved with that. Commitment. Are we all committed to one thing for whatever that contract period may be? So I just think, what are we really solving for? It's just, as long as we have efficiencies and we have our work paths and way forward, I think a blend of both is probably what's the best way to do it. The things we get at scale, try to get them at the best cost we can, and things that are a little bit more odd, then whoever can get them here in my appropriate timeline is probably where I'm going to go.
Well, and the other thing to consider is that times, they are a changing. So what we're discussing we're discussing this in February of 2021 is very different than the conversation we'd have in February of 2020 or even February 2019. So it's hard to say how this may play out over the coming years, and there may be some changes. There may be some special buy direct programs that open up with certain manufacturers, but not with others, or through certain groups, but not with others. Or there may be group buy opportunities on certain things, but they may not always be the right fit. So I guess, it'll be interesting to watch. I think, Mark, your point is valid, and Larry, you brought it up as well. It's like, what are we really trying to accomplish here from the standpoint of what are we really gaining? And there's probably bigger fish to fry on than to just argue on this nonstop. So in that sense, why don't we take a quick break, and then we'll come back with an interesting topic.
As many of you know, the Super Friends have always been better received when we have more input from you. So here's your chance. Send us a note at mailbag@avsuperfriends.com and get involved with the show. We're looking for some topics to discuss, some fellow nerds to talk to, or just general AV awesomeness to brag about. But remember, we'll probably steal your ideas. And I suppose we'd take some criticism, but that wouldn't be very nice. Anyway, drop us a note at mailbag@avsuperfriends.com and find out how quickly we ask you to join this nonsense.
Well, welcome back. So today's topic is going to be one that we've mentioned a few times, and it comes up more and more, and it's something that we're all dealing with in different ways. And I think we see other institutions, maybe colleagues, talking about it, and it sounds like a good solution at first, then it makes you think about, is this really what we should be doing? And that's the idea of proprietary room systems, for lack of a better term, or branded room systems. So if you think about it, years ago, the only way to do video conferencing was with this proprietary hardware appliances. They had limited interoperability. They could call each other and they could talk to each other, sort of thing. If you remember the old people plus content model, that was there. But you could always tell when you were on one system and the other people were on a different one, because some features weren't quite there, or some things worked differently, and you had to kind of jump through some hoops to be able to see their screen being sent as video. And it was a bit of a challenge. And then a few years ago, maybe 5 years or so, we started exploring the idea of using PCs as kind of that center of a video conferencing system. Software and hardware had caught up to the point where The quality of the call was roughly on par with these dedicated appliances, but PCs were far more flexible. They're far cheaper. They can do other things at the same time as they're in a call, and they have more capability for sharing software and whatnot. So now we have systems that take that PC and they make it the center of their, they make the PC can only do the call at the time, which functionally turns it back into a dedicated appliance. In fact, at CES this year, Logitech announced a new line of VC appliances that they believe they're based on Android, but they only work with their cameras and they work only with their microphones and with only their accessories. So now it's kind of like, are we back to this model of proprietary appliances? Are we going to back ourselves in a corner if we go an entire campus on one system or the other? It's kind of the way I like to phrase this conversation is, what's the difference between a Zoom room and a room with Zoom? What are the pros and cons there? So, and Justin, I know you've been doing a lot of Zoom rooms, actual no fooling Zoom rooms. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah. Well, so proprietary boxes, you asked the question, my answer is yes and no. These proprietary boxes that we're putting in our classrooms are proprietary to Zoom. But the problem with the old codecs was the maintenance plans. You had to send them in. Maybe they sent you some parts to put in and it was very proprietary. Oh, we ran out of parts from this Chinese manufacturer, that kind of stuff. But now this proprietary system that we're putting in is just a Dell computer. So when the hard drive goes bad and when the memory goes bad, our support group basically understands how to fix that. But the problem still lies there that we are now backed into a corner with Zoom. So we are not putting in Zoom capable rooms for the most part. We're sprinkling in onesies and twosies where somebody requests a microphone or, hey, these stopgap measures that we did during COVID aren't working as well as we like. We want a little bit more enhancement for some audio. Yeah, we could do that, no problem. That's more of a Zoom capable room where, the client machine in front of them can run Skype or what WebEx or Microsoft Teams or whatever you want.
Did you find the oldest examples you could think of? Skype, WebEx.
Skype. Well, what's funny is
the first version of Jabber.
The reason why I said Skype, there's a reason. I just downloaded Office 365 for my computer that I just got from the university. It came with bundled together Teams and Skype. I'm like, what the shit is that?
This is like the fourth show you've been ranting about this computer. I don't think it's a good start.
Oh, I finally got it working. Yeah,
we're good. It works now. You can actually turn it on.
The computer. Yeah,
until next week when you're back on campus.
Apple OS. No, I think we're good now. But that's a story for a different day. But so I think that with us, we're putting in a lot of Zoom rooms. It replaces the old style rooms, and I keep asking the question, why are we putting in that much more money? There's maintenance cost per year per room for Zoom. There's various things that is limited about these Zoom rooms, HTTP content, things like that. You're relying on some kind of wireless presentation to get a laptop connected. We don't have an aux connection in these Zoom rooms because USB switching doesn't work well on a Zoom Codec PC. So there's a lot of problems we experienced. They are lower cost, and the reason why we're doing them is because we can manage the connection through Zoom to kick the class off 5 minutes early and then make sure that the class ends. And whether that works or not may be a topic for a different show. And we all know that there's other ways to do that through different control systems and different dashboards and things like that. But that's just kind of what our approach has been. So far, it seems to work for us okay. We're getting a lot of echo during testing, but for some reason, the echo isn't presenting itself when they're using the classrooms live, which then makes me wonder if they're not using the full capacity of these Zoom rooms. So again, we're in the early stages of this, and I think it's going to change. But, we'll see how sustainable it is at WKU.
See, I was in that Kool-Aid line at one point, and
yeah,
I thought that this thing is going to be sweet, right? And so
it's not sweet.
And then people started dropping dead, and I was like, wait a minute, maybe I don't want to be in this Kool-Aid line after all. And so I think when we looked at it and kind of did the analysis, we all kind of got a little bit, I don't know, blindsided or narrow-sided maybe is better. I put it this way. They do the things you want really well. They do not do the things you need at all. And so there becomes the kind of the problem is on paper, and it's kind of a sleight of hand. It's like, wow, look at all this thing it does. Like, wow, that seems like what we want. But are you going to get your metrics you want? Does it tie into your service center? Things like that. And like, that's where it all started to kind of fall apart for us, is kind of how do we act as caretakers for these things without adding any more confusion to the users or staff. Like, if I just stack a bunch of PCs up in a rack, it's like, oh, you want to use the actual PC, not the Zoom PC or the camera PC or the audio PC. Like, how do we keep it simple?
We've had that
we know how to
problem come up a lot, Mark, where I'm not familiar with our training program. So I don't know if this was addressed in training, but when the users walked in, what did they do in the Zoom room? They saw the client machine because they just got off their couch from doing all these Zoom classes stuck at home. They walked into the classroom and fired up Zoom right on the PC. And it was super echoey and super weird because they were using a dock cam with a built-in microphone. And we spent all this money on these dual cameras and all these mics in the ceiling, and they're not even using it. So it's like, okay, well,
there's nothing
what are we
better
trying to
than
do here?
Support when you have that. When somebody's in a room that may or may not have an old school codec of sorts, and they plug their laptop in and they call support desk, I'm in this video conferencing enabled classroom. I just want to run Zoom on my laptop. Can I do that? And then
can I just do that? It makes it simple.
You all know what happens at that level. You're like, but I want that camera on my computer. How do I get that camera? They only see the little tiny web camera, and they just assume that I'm in the Starship Enterprise. I have access to all this technology. It's magically going to work over this old VGA cable somehow, and it's all going to just integrate. It's like, that's the client expectation. So, throwing another computer in the mix really doesn't really streamline any of that.
Yeah, and I think that's what turned me off from the get-go. They were like, "Oh, you can do the Zoom room." I'm like, okay, well, that sounds great. I'll run it on the PC. Oh, no, you can't. What do you mean you can't? No, you have to have a completely separate one. What? Yeah, and it has to be, you can't just be the run-of-the-mill one. It has to be this ultra 18 bajillion core, 17,000 gigs of RAM. I'm like, you're out of your damn mind.
They're not that bad,
No,
but I still giggle at the whole.
I exaggerate for effect. I'm a liar.
It's radio.
Nice.
I'm lying to make friends.
Nice.
Kind of like it.
But I guess what I'm concerned with the most is in the past two days, I've had 2 Teams calls, 2 Zoom calls, and a couple of Hangouts. And so, and that's just me personally. I don't know what the instructors who go into this space are going to expect to use. And so until I do, I can't finalize on any product.
And that's where
I ran into issues with forcing it.
Well, you remember 2 years ago, Logitech, when they first really kind of started down this meetup thing, right? And they had the little USB touch panel controller thing and the little Nook or whatever people call it, but the little square PC that would run the thing. And I said, well, this looks like great, because then you run Zoom and or Teams, use your little controller to flop back and forth. No, wait. What do you mean, wait? No, you can only run one or the other, but you can flash it to the other one. Well, how long does flashing take? Oh, well, you have to contact us, and then we have to just... Like, okay.
Nope.
Never mind.
Crestron does that now with their Mercury systems. It's like the same physical hardware, but depending on what software you're going to run on, it's a different piece. And then you can't...
Why can't you just put a button configuration?
That's been my argument with some of them. I'm like, look, I can't tell you that we're all Zoom all the time, and I can't tell you that we're all Teams all the time, like Larry was saying. And so your product really has no use for me whatsoever, because there isn't a standardized system. Even when we say it's standardized, it's not. We all know that. And they all looked at you kind of like, you're out of your mind that you want to do more than one. And my question always was,
we don't want to do more than one.
If I log into my my personal computer or my iPhone, I can do all of them. Why can't your thing do all of them? Oh, well, it's the hooks and things. No, stop. You're telling me that it's that much more complicated. And so I just kind of got frustrated with the whole thing. And then there was the extra hoops you had to jump through, like when you wanted to record your Zoom things. Right now, if it's on your profile, if it's on your profile, it just saves it.
So from an IT support standpoint, and I'm just thinking about how our workflow is at Western. When somebody calls you and says, my I don't know, Skype call didn't go well to support, like what happens? So if you're allowing everybody to use whatever they want to fire up a class, how does that support work? Because it's very set in stone at Western that we're a Zoom campus and our support desk is trained on Zoom. And then whenever a faculty member has to call in from their home office, we can help with Zoom because they're using single sign-on and we're managing the accounts. And when they walk into a room, they sign on. We know who's in there because of the scheduling. And when we have a Zoom problem in a Zoom room, it calls the support desk. They know it's Zoom. So you're not having to train for Teams. You're not having to train for Skype and train for all these other problems. Maybe it's just a different workflow.
So out of curiosity, when you did the O365 thing, how hard are they pushing Teams?
They're not. They you know what? Here's a funny story.
Microsoft, not the school. Yeah.
Well, Microsoft is pushing it, but the university is pushing back, saying we understand it's cheaper, but we are not set up to support this right now because what happened was the university took over my email address that I had associated with Teams, and because of that happening, I cannot turn on my video camera anymore because they don't support it. But they've turned the switch on, right? But
they unscrewed
I'm like,
the light
well,
bulb.
I was using it by myself. So now if anybody invites me to a Teams meeting, I have to tell them to send it to my Gmail address.
Well, Justin, to your question about the support thing, I think what you're getting at is if somebody calls up, and this is the way I think we handle it, I don't want to speak for our entire support structure, but this is the way a lot of it comes up is we say, well, our officially supported one right now is Zoom, but we are actively looking at others. So if you use Zoom, we can support you. Exactly like you said, we can support you at home, we can support you here, we can help you. If you use something else, it probably should work, and we're happy to kind of work with you to make sure it works, but we can't provide the same level of support. So basically, that puts it on them. If they want to use Google Hangout, that's great. If they have trouble with the audio system in Google Hangout because it's not configured or whatever, then a little bit of ownership gets put back on them. So you're right. You can't, just because the system is PC-based and thus will drive 1,000 different things, but somebody wants to run See Me or Adobe Connect, neither of which exist anymore as far as I know. But if someone wanted to, you can't provide the same level of support. So I think it's perfectly fine to say our officially recommended one is, use this or this, and we can help you. If you use something else, it might work, but I don't know. That's the same as if they go into the classroom with anything. So if I go in and I want to run software, but it's from my laptop, it's like, well, great. Can you see a picture from your laptop? Yes. Well, then technically my job is done. But
I think that's a little different than saying, use whatever you want, because that kind of sounds like we're supporting you no matter what software package you use. So, that's a good clarification on that.
Yeah, and I think even we have
right?
Yeah, we even have an officially supported one, but that doesn't mean, like Chris said, if somebody else is using something else, we'll try to help them. But even that being the case, I can't say next year we won't be with Teams. And I can't say that I want those same cameras that I'm currently using with Zoom to work with Panopto and to do other things within the room as it is.
Yeah, I think
that's an interesting
right?
point.
You want to roll out
if you're
the
changing
best
from one to the
can.
other, what happens to your hardware? It's Mark, you had brought up in the on topic last week the idea of like, I got to change out all my hardware because we're using a new system now. Whereas if you keep your hardware generic, and I think most anything we would consider AV equipment would be generic, should work with anything. So if you change from one system to another, well, maybe configuration changes or whatever, but it's the same. Whereas otherwise, you may need to toss equipment, and that seems wasteful. So.
Yeah,
Yes,
it just really
that last mile thing, right? You want to keep as much intact as we possibly can and as agnostic as possible, and allow people to run what they want. The centrally supported flavor of the week, whatever it may be, hopefully it lasts longer than a week, should provide all the needed bells and whistles that they would need for their common class, whatever that is. If they on their own decide, I want to have this hangout or whatever it is, hopefully they're kind of owning that process. And yes, if they recognize that the hardware works for that and they are willing to go with it, cool. But if you're calling our support desk, these are the things we're actually going to support and assist you with.
Yeah, and I think where we came from with a lot of this was, I didn't like the dual PC systems, because we provide that in every one of our systems. But my premise has always been, if I can get quality AV in and out of the computer via USB or whatever, but if I can get it in and out of there, then it doesn't matter how many different computers I roll through there. If it's a laptop, I just unplug the USB and plug it into the other thing. I'm still getting quality product to go through no matter what the university decides to do tomorrow, because we don't have any control over administration, right? The second thing I also looked at is that I think we've made it very clear that I am not one that just like falls in love with one thing and stays with it forever and ever. And I particularly don't like having the and I'm going to pick on Zoom here, the Zoom certified camera and the Zoom certified thing, microphone pod, and you're like, wait a minute. So now I'm stuck into the, if I want to be certified, then, and this may not be the case, this is an example of, well, then I have to use the Hudley camera, and I have to use the Yamaha thing, and I have to use the iPad as a controller. And I'm like, wait, that doesn't necessarily give me what I consider quality AV or quality control or quality security systems across the board. So I don't like being tied into your version of a certified product if I don't have to be. So all those things kind of turned me off of the dedicated system, and I just had to kind of giggle at the whole Logitech thing with them, and now they've reintroduced the Codec deal, and I'm just like, you know what? For some people, for some businesses, for some areas, it makes all the sense in the world. The Mercury product from Crestron, if I was the owner of Boeing, right, and I knew that I had 40,000 or conference rooms all over the world, and they all used the Mercury deal running Teams, done, right? Buy them up. But we're not. We're in such that weird thing of it's, even if you standardize on something, we all know that we standardize on whiteboards, and I still have to provide a chalkboard every now and then because somebody just can't deal with a marker. So that kind of deal.
Math department.
Hard sciences usually, yeah. So I think we have a fantastic discussion going here. I hate to step in the middle here, but we do need to take a quick break, and we'll come back and yell at each other some more.
There's a great new digital magazine from Higher Ed AV Media found at higheredav.com, and we do a special monthly show where we actually stay on topic. It's a show where we try to really focus on a single topic and break it down into AV SuperFriends style. That's AV SuperFriends on topic, found at avsuperfriends.com, higheredav.com, iTunes, Amazon, Spotify, Google, and wherever else you get your podcasts from.
Welcome back. So, Jamie, right as we went off to break, you mentioned the idea of a standard. A lot of times someone might look at a system like this as for standardized kind of interface, standardized experience. If you're buying for a large enterprise, it would make sense to say, I'm going to pick one system. Everyone's going to have to use it. And we're going to make everything operate the same way. And so in that sense, it makes perfect sense. And I think that's what's driving a lot of these kind of this return to a proprietary room system, for lack of a better term again, is that we can say if we know we're only going to be using this one type of connection, this one type of software, and we can buy functionally the same hardware across the world or across campus or whatever that might be, then this guarantees a specific level of experience, and that's great for the enterprise. It's absolutely not, I think, what most of us are used to at universities, because anybody can walk in at any time and decide they really want to drive from their laptop, or they really want to, use some other piece of software because they're a visiting professor from somewhere else and their university uses something else for it. So I'm not sure if that quite lines up, but I think that's probably the reason we're seeing these things. And then, but do we think that's going to continue? Or are we going to see anybody address that and come up with something that's more flexible? Because honestly, and we've talked about it in the last few minutes, all these systems are capable of running 5 or 6 different systems. So why couldn't we have a system that and it takes 5 times as long to configure, but you configure it for Zoom and configure it for Teams, you configure it for Hangout, whatnot. And then when I come in as the instructor, I select the one I want, and then it works that way. And I know what a lot of you are listening to this, you're saying, well, just use a PC to do that. Well, yeah, I get that, but can we meet them halfway on some of these?
I think, and no, I think it's going to get worse. I really do. And it has nothing to do with us, right? It has everything to do with marketing and licensing, right? So why don't we see, for a while there, why don't we see HD base T on things? Well, because you got to license that product. And I think what you're finding is that it's the corporations and the back channel handshakes that says, well, why does Crestron have this thing? Well, it's a licensing agreement, right? And so it's an advertising, it's a marketing, it's a this and that. And I think it is going to get a whole lot worse before it gets better. Because in their view is like, if you don't like it, then run it on your PC. And so I don't think it's going to get better. I do think we're going to see more of these Logitech-ish kind of things, especially in the short term. But it's all handshakes, it's all back rooms, and as long as Microsoft's throwing money at it, and it'll be really interesting when it's like we all say this, not if Zoom will be bought, but when Zoom is purchased by name thy giant conglomerate, AT&T, T-Mobile, Amazon. When they're purchased and they take over, so now you start seeing, do we really only have 3 options? And the back channel purchasing thing is going to drive this market, at least the peripheral market, into a way like Dolby. Why don't our DSPs, all of our DSPs that we put in our rooms, right? Every single one of them has more horsepower than ever capable of decoding Dolby or DTS, right? You can't get one.
It's licensing.
It's licensing, and it's at some point stupid. And all the manufacturers say the same thing. It's like, we're not paying that because it's such an exorbitant cost for a very minimal amount of gain. Just buy a receiver, and it kind of pisses you off because you're like, wait, I just
think you're onto
$2,500.
Things consolidate. Yeah, things will consolidate to a point where we will kind of breed the hipster contrarian technologist, right? Who will come to class with my vinyl, and I want this vinyl to work with that camera because I don't want to be a part of the megatrend, whatever .com thing, and I want this to work my way, and your support desk better make it work for me, right? And so we all have to deal with that at some level. And so I think the more we standardize on these kind of larger things, the more that is going to pop up, and we'll have to deal with the anomalies.
And I think
think what happens if Amazon has this huge conspiracy just right after they bought Zoom, and then if your campus is a Zoom room campus, then shame on you because Amazon's full of.
Well, let's go back to
it's like you don't know what's going to happen in the future, right?
Yeah, go back to the Cisco model. Buy it and kill it.
Are you suggesting we're going to cancel our video conference systems because of what the CEO of some company
did
politics like on Twitter?
Yeah, it could very well could.
It could.
It doesn't come to that, but
and I think that's one of the big differences between us and some of these corporate giants is that if again, Boeing or Budweiser or somebody says we're going to put these in all of our conference rooms, great. And when they get mad, when the new CEO comes in and says, well, I don't want to do Zoom anymore, I'm going to do Teams, he puts forth the capital and just changes it, just changes all of it. That's just part of it. At the university, I mean, this happened to us. We were well on our way down because we're Cisco, down the path of we're going to start using Jabber and all this other stuff. And we had a person come in and in his previous institution, he had some handshake deal with Zoom. And when he got here, like the first thing he said was, you're going to use Zoom from here on out. And he had the contract signed before he could go any further. And so then we were stuck, right? And we're like, wait, well, when he leaves, because he's only stayed anyway, he's like, Chris, he's a nomad. He's already got his wagon hitched to go to the next place, right?
I prefer to describe it as traveling from town to town solving mysteries. Thank you very much.
He's a carpetbagger.
There you
go. But so when Harold Hill leaves town and the next guy comes in and decides that why do we have Zoom and Teams? Screw it, Zoom's out because we already have a Microsoft contract.
Let's just do Teams.
We're all left sitting there holding these things going, uh-oh.
Now what do we do?
Yeah, and that's
I mean, to your point, Jamie, our last VP, not our last one, a prior VP of IT, we've had a few of them lately. 3 or 4 or 5, 6 to create that anonymity,
not IUP,
right. He hated Oracle. Not sure why. I don't know if Oracle pissing his Cheerios at a previous job or something.
He was a Matrix fan.
He came in, he wiped out all the back end systems that ran on Oracle, for what I understand.
Jeez.
And changed them to something else that ran different databases. So I don't know if that was just 1 or 2 systems or what the impact of that was, but that can happen at a flip of the switch based upon one single hire.
It's an agenda, right? But I think when we look at the kind of maturity of our IT choices, at the heart of that, you do want to choose things that are agile and allow you to change and pivot accordingly. And so I think just by nature of kind of following that best practice, you got to be very cautious when you're choosing to put all of your eggs in one basket and say, this is the service we're rolling out, and everything that's associated with it has to be branded as such. Like, you looking down the road, you're setting yourself up to not be able to pivot when the bad tweet about company XYZ comes out and nobody wants to go to a school using that technology. You better be ready for that.
And I also think it goes to, the history of said company, right? How often are they releasing version? Let's look, I like Apple products, but I don't like some of their business products. And we know some of it why. Like, when they release the new OS, it's free. You can download it and use it, but you can't use your 32-bit software anymore. Well, but I already spent $1,000 on Photoshop. Sorry, don't upgrade. Well, but what? Right? And so what do you do? And if you look at some of the histories of some of these companies, now Zoom was still new when all of this nonsense started and it became really popular. But some of those, you're like, I don't know. Every time you make a change, it breaks everything, Polycom. I'm not going to throw anybody under the bus, but... like their whole API.
Still looking for sponsors.
Well, Jamie, let me pick up your thread here. Larry, you guys are a Google campus. Google is notorious for coming out with cool stuff. It works for a couple of years. They let it languish. They kill it. So what happens when Google says, oh, we're moving from Hangouts, which, by the way, I think Hangouts is like their 4th or something video conferencing system. 5th one. So what happens when they say, okay, Hangouts is dead, check out this thing, and then you find out that it's a different API to talk with the touch panels, all these things, like, even if it's with the same company, all these things change, and now you're like, well, what the? We're still with you, we're still paying the same, institutional contract. What the heck? So, I would say of all the companies, Microsoft is probably the best, as much as we don't say that very often. They're the best at like maintaining like really old crap, which should have died a long time ago, but they're still out there supporting it because they have so many customers kicking and screaming saying, yeah, our nuclear plants run on, I did just say nuclear pants. Our nuclear plants run on
Windows 95.
XP. Yeah, Windows 95. And they're like, so you can look this stuff up where Microsoft will say, we don't support that anymore, but they're still releasing patches under like their super extended service contracts. Whereas you have somebody like Google who's generally much more nimble, and they'll just be like, you know what? We're bored with that. Boom, done. And they just announce it like, 6 months from now, that's gone. So I don't know if you guys have thought about that,
things
but
that are running on like Windows 95. Yeah.
I see XP machines buried in departments where they're not allowed on the network, but they're still functioning. And yeah, we are a Google campus, but we still are also Microsoft, and we have Microsoft Teams rolling out like crazy now. And I would be surprised if this time next year, Teams doesn't have a bigger footprint in higher ed than Zoom does.
Oh, it will. We know it will.
So I just think it's going to take over.
Well, what's really interesting. What's really interesting with that ordeal is that it's part of the O365 contract, but only at a limited number. So if you want to outfit your entire organization with Teams, it's a premium. It's an update. It's an upgraded service. So like when we rolled out O365, they had enough Teams licenses for admin and IT. And if you were anybody else, you just didn't get it until they upped the contract. So Microsoft is... Hey, and I know they got to make $1, right? Go get them. I don't particularly like
there's
it.
Some
but
inherent
whatever.
like there's like data flow things there that have to be accounted for before I can see teams being rolled out into a classroom environment. Like,
Yeah.
it's an ugly thing. You're
Yeah.
it's a
So
huge fire
we're doing
hose
the
of
same
stuff
sort of
coming at
thing
you. And
where-
I don't know how you're gonna make rails for that.
We're using Teams, the same sort of thing. Like admin and IT is functionally testing it. And basically the idea is use this as much as you can so we can kind of figure out how it works, where it breaks, all that stuff. And what surprises me, and they've made changes over the last couple of years, but someone just said it, that like Zoom was kind of the new kid on the block a year or two ago, and they just were in the right place at the right time, and they really took off in the last year because they are very low friction to like get into a call, to start a call, to change stuff, as much as they hide things and move things around and whatnot. But for the most part, I click a button in the email and I join a Teams call and boop, I'm in, there's everybody sort of thing. Whereas, I'm sorry, a Zoom call. Whereas Teams, it's still a little
It didn't
clunky.
hurt that they
Yes,
gave them to you
start
for
it.
free though either. 45 minutes of free, just roll with it. That was
Yeah.
like,
Oh, yeah.
perfect.
But I mean, but my point being, one thing that surprised me about Teams is we started using this about a year or so ago, and I was like, all right, well, it's, where's this option? Why don't I see that? No, it's not there. It doesn't exist. And you go look it up, and you find out that Teams has been around as a product for over 5 years, and it's like they almost ignored it, and now they're like, oh, we probably should take this serious. One of the ones that caught my eye was somebody requested, if you recall, early on Teams, you could only see 4 people in a call, and I was like,
Yeah.
wait, there's got to be an option to see more than that 9. I think Zoom then went to 25 and now 50 and whatever. I found a Microsoft, one of the Microsoft forums with all the MVPs on there helping people. And there was this request from over 4 years earlier saying, I need to see more than 4 people. And the response from Microsoft was functionally, we don't consider that important, so we're not going to do it. And then there was a reply from like 3.5 years later. They were like, yeah, we're working on this now. It was kind of, it was surprising to me, but I think your point is valid. We will definitely see Teams take a larger chunk, not a large, but a larger chunk of the higher ed market, but it's not there yet. I think it will get there, and it may get there just because of licensing and that sort of thing. But it's just one of those things where it's inevitable that will sneak its way into classrooms, I guess.
I think where we're at, really, some of this is a really interesting conversation, and I think where we're at on this video conference deal is kind of like where we were at 8-10 years ago with PCs, right? You were either a Microsoft campus or you weren't. If you brought a Chromebook on, you're an idiot, or you were in elementary school. And if you had an Apple product, we don't support that because we're a Microsoft school, or pick thy flavor, right? And now it's like, we don't care what you bring in, Android, I don't care, whatever. Bring in your Raspberry Pi, let's hook this thing up and let's go. It's really more, at least where in my experience, that whole you are one thing or another kind of PC is done. And I think we're going to see that with video conferencing as well. But I think where this is interesting is that we're all sitting here today and we kind of had this back and forth of like, should we pick Zoom or Teams, or should we just standardize on this one thing? But if we took this and we said, in the AV world, pick a manufacturer and says, well, we're going to throw out all the Trons, right? Well, we're a Crestron. And that means the speaker, the microphone, the wire, every single thing is a product line from Extron, Crestron, I don't care who, right? Pick a manufacturer. And we would say, and for the most part, we'd be like, you mean you're going to buy the speakers from that company because they suck? Well, yeah, because that's what we do. You know, like we would have, like, in our industry, we would have like fist fights. Like, what are you doing? And yet here in VC, we want to lock it down again and go backwards to it's either Polycom or Tandberg. You know, again, another example of Cisco bought and destroyed. But
I think a lot of that has to do with just simply looking at when, and this is just at WKU, and this may be the same for you all, when we were doing Polycom Cisco Codecs, who was responsible for that? The AV group. When we're doing Zoom or Teams, who's responsible for that? The AV group and back-end IT and the servers and security. And so now IT's a stakeholder, and they've got this push for standardization. So that's, I think a little bit.
That's interesting there because, like, we didn't deal with the codecs because they
we did.
Yeah, especially once we became 100% Cisco. the networking people took it over because they had the Cisco contract. They had all of the back end servers and everything else, right? So they just did it. And same with Polycom to an extent. We put it in. We made sure that the little A and V was connected. But for the most part, a lot of that was just, it was the network people. And with Zoom and things, the desktop support folks, the computer folks, all they do is put the application on there and they don't want to think about it. Like, if it has anything, if it's outside of the walls of a PC, they don't, mice and keyboards sometimes are challenges. It's just like, no, look.
Yeah.
We take care of what is inside the box. Anything outside the box is somebody else's. So there's a lot of times where I have more involvement in these soft codec things than I did in the hard codec things, because if you think about it, those proprietary systems always came with their own cameras. They came with their own cables. I mean, like the RJ45 with the extra hump in it, that was wonderful, right? And it was $100 billion cable.
You can shave those down.
Yeah, it's just like, are you kidding me? Or they were offset just a little, so you couldn't use a standard wire.
Yeah, the Polycom ones are like that, but you could shave them down.
So, but they came with all that. You just put it in, and so that's where we were a little bit different there. Is that, and I like this better actually. I like the idea that I own everything else, and I just got to get it inside that box. I don't really care what shows up. I just got, here's your USB cable, and that's it. I just hand it to them, and they're done. Now, there's a lot of challenges to that, but
yeah. So in that sense, though, maybe it's good that that AV systems and a classroom system, a room system, the larger idea of a room system, is complicated enough. It involves equipment from so many different manufacturers and so many different protocols and so many different types of connections and things that a lot of people honestly they don't really pay attention to that. And if we need to change out the DSP for a different one, or we need to change out the control processor for something else or whatever, they're only seeing the front end. And as long as it works, as long as everything talks together, as long as they can get into their Zoom or their Teams or their Google Call or whatever, they really don't care, which allows us some flexibility to change out stuff as we need, not being part of a contract and not necessarily being roped into a proprietary ecosystem, which really only talks amongst itself. As attractive as that might be purely from a number standpoint, to say, well, if we buy the same thing for everybody, then we know exactly what it costs and it's cookie cutter and we can deploy these and it scales and it's great. But that's not a good fit for universities. So maybe it is good that our systems are a little more complex. And I'm going to be a little blunt here. They're a little more complex than they probably need to be a lot of times, but that allows us flexibility in them. So if we do need to change something, or if we need to change what this room does versus that room, then the option is there to do that. Whereas if we bought that standalone box that does, well, it's got the internal microphone and everything's all great, but like I need to add one more thing, you're kind of stuck. And then now what do you do? There's no more inputs on it, sort of thing. So
yeah, we're almost stuck. We're kind of like stuck in between that fence where you're in the proprietary world, but if we had to change over to Microsoft Teams, what that means is we would have to reimage the Zoom computer and figure out how to get Dante into Teams directly without a DSP, and we should be okay.
So
but that's all time, and that's a lot of changeover that needs to happen.
But I think that's where your situation, even though you guys are using Zoom Rooms and you have the Zoom Rooms CDs. Who has a CD anymore?
CDs.
You have the Zoom Rooms computers and such. But you have gone out of your way, like you're using the Dante microphones and you're using these displays and you're using this and you're using that, right? And so you're able to pivot when you need to.
It's
the
like
things
a hybrid. It's not pivoting as easy though. It's a lot of labor to do.
It's not as easy, but it's still doable.
But I get really concerned by these D10. Is that the company D10?
Yes.
All in Wonder.
Where everything's cooked in.
Yes, and it's all in there. And I bought a couple of the new line displays a few years ago because they fit what I needed them to do. Mm-hmm. And I can't use them anymore. Like the display works. The display looked good and things, and some of the touch works. But after 2 or 3 years, I couldn't do anything else with it. They kind of end-of-lifed it. They moved on to a different software package, and now we're stuck. And I really get concerned by either whether it's the Logitech deal or these soundbar things that are coming out that have it built into the soundbar. right? It's all just part of the and Crestron has their thing, and Yamaha has their thing, and there's a few of them out there, right? And it's just all built into the soundbar, and you're like, but can I use it when it's not a soundbar or without being Zoom or Teams? Or they're like, well, no.
And I think some of those are designed for, especially the ones that are like the soundbar. It's got the microphones, it's got the speakers, it's got the mic array, and there's got that little EPTZ camera. It does a lot of cool things. I buy this. It's got a touch panel that connects by a single cable. Boom, done, sort of thing. I think that's very attractive to a lot of people from the standpoint of, hey, that's simple. I can deploy these very quickly. But it's definitely for a different market. It's really designed for the small business who doesn't have anything else and they just want 2 of these in their conference rooms, or it's for the very large business that wants to buy 5,000 of them and just blast them all over the planet.
Yeah, but those are the things
we spend so much time trying to make things work slightly differently for the exact need of the space and the people using it.
Yeah, and but that's you're right. I agree with all of that. And that's what concerns me. Is because of these products, and who does it, usually it's a decision maker who decides that this is the best product. Now at that point it becomes a, do I want to be here anymore kind of question, not a, but I mean, we've all been in a situation where it's like, no, this is a terrible idea, and you're putting it in anyway because somebody made it. I still
don't think it's a great idea.
Yeah.
I still think, and when you think about it, and so another argument against, going all Zoom capable or whatever, it's like, well, so if we did that and we switched next week to Teams, we still have to go out and reimage all the computers in the classrooms because we're responsible for that in our department. We're just having to reimage the classroom computer now and the Codec computer, which is a standard computer. So I still think it's more labor to do that switch. And it's not guaranteed that every little piece and every little trinket that we've bought with these Zoom rooms is going to work exactly the same with Teams. It may work okay, but will the mute sync? I don't know. Maybe not. Well, who knows? We'll see. But it's going to be a problem.
Yeah.
So, Justin,
I know we
an
started down the path of
as
proprietary rooms and systems and got into the VC conversation.
Well, that's where this conversation was going to go. Justin, you raised a point about the some systems with the same exact hardware provide different features, and a lot of that comes down to licensing or things. But it's aggravating to see, hey, that's a cool feature, but I have to be using this software and with this piece of hardware. And then a year later, they announce the one that works with any. It's like, so it was there, but they had an exclusivity window or something. So that's aggravating to no end. And it's those sorts of business decisions that make me now look askance at that company. And maybe next time I'm buying something, I'll think slightly differently because of the way they did that before. So, yeah. Well, yeah. I guess this is we're not going to solve this today. It's certainly a large it's a larger conversation than we can handle in an hour. I think we all have various dealings with proprietary systems that work well in the right environment, but you have to know what they do and what they don't do. And unfortunately, at a university, you never know who the next user is going to be, and you don't quite have that same level, from a corporate standpoint, to say no, we're not going to support that, because universities are built on open communication and open sharing of ideas, and so why shouldn't we be able to support that? But so these things are still they're gonna sneak in, they're gonna show up. Like you just said, we see it, we're doing it anyway. We know it's a bad idea, but we're gonna do it. So. I don't know. Any last thoughts from anyone, or do we just throw in the towel on this and see what comes up?
Well, maybe it's a great idea, and maybe Zoom's going to take over everything, and Zoom's going to laugh at Teams 5 years from now. We don't know, but it seems like it possibly could be a bad idea at this point.
And Texas could freeze over.
Yeah, right. There's no way.
All right, I think we've killed it.
Well, I think it's probably more likely Google will give up on Hangouts at some point. Microsoft will buy Zoom and then get rid of Teams, and then we'll just be using Zoom anyway.
And then they'll change everything. We still have to reimage every damn codec in our classrooms, even though we're still. Yes,
they will still require you to redo everything, and they'll change the logo on the screen. So.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think we've managed to bury this one. So let's close it out, and I want to thank everyone for listening, and we'll be back next time. Well, we've managed to ruin yet another episode of AV Super Friends Off the Rails. You can contact us with questions, topic ideas, or general complaints at mailbag@avsuperfriends.com. If you complain loud enough, we might just invite you on the show.
Nice work, everyone. Sharp broadcast. Really good. Everyone on the floor as well. Really a lot of hustle. I liked it.
The opinions expressed by the AV Super Friends are solely those of the individuals and do not represent their respective institutions, organizations, companies, or clients.